Was Henry II really just a king? Did he just sit around and sign decrees, or was he a whirlwind of conquest, a force of nature wrapped in velvet robes and a surprisingly sharp sword? Could a man born into relative obscurity, a second son overshadowed by elder brothers, actually build an empire stretching from the Scottish Highlands to the sun-baked shores of Spain? Let's find out. The year is 1151. Henry Plantagenet, a man who'd spent most of his life largely ignored, finds himself suddenly, terrifyingly, King of England. Not a glorious, triumphant coronation, mind you. More like a messy, blood-soaked scramble after his brother, Stephen, finally kicked the bucket. The country was a disaster, a jigsaw puzzle of warring factions, ruined castles, and a treasury emptier than a politician's promise. Imagine a battlefield, but instead of swords and shields, everyone was arguing about who got to loot whose property. That was England. And Henry, the second son, the one everyone assumed would be a footnote in history, was now in charge. His wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman who could charm a dragon and rule a kingdom with a single glare, was his anchor, his advisor, and frankly, the only reason he hadn't completely lost his mind. She'd brought with her a vast, glittering territory in southwestern France, a prize that had been the source of endless conflict for centuries. Eleanor wasn't just a queen, she was a force. She'd been a duchess, a mother to 5 children, and a player in the political games of Europe. She was a woman who knew how to wield power, and she wasn't about to let her husband fumble his way through this whole mess. Their first home wasn't exactly regal. Forget towering castles and manicured gardens. They moved into the royal palace of Bermondsey, a crumbling, rat-infested monstrosity on the south bank of the Thames. Picture this, a palace so damaged by civil war that it was practically held together with prayer and mud. It smelled like damp wool, stale ale, and desperation, not exactly the setting for a modern monarch, but it was a base, a starting point. And from this decidedly unglamorous location, Eleanor started to make a name for herself. London, in 1155, was a sensory assault. Forget quaint villages and polite conversation. This was a city that roared with life and a healthy dose of chaos. William Fitzstephen, a cleric with a penchant for exaggeration, described it as a place where crime, filth, despair, and humanity mingled like ingredients in a particularly potent stew. Imagine a marketplace crammed with every imaginable good, silks from the East, spices from the Mediterranean, weapons forged in the heart of the Black Forest, all vying for attention amidst the stench of unwashed bodies and overflowing sewers. Jesters and jugglers entertained the masses, while shadowy figures lurked in the alleys, ready to relieve the wealthy of their purses. It was a city of extremes, a place where fortunes could be made and lost in the blink of an eye. The royal palace at Westminster, a short distance away, was a different beast altogether. It was a colossal structure, a testament to Norman ambition, but it had suffered terribly during the Civil War. Think of it as a giant, decaying skeleton, walls crumbling, floors collapsing, mortar crumbling. But Eleanor, with her keen eye for beauty and her strategic mind, recognized its potential. She envisioned a place worthy of a queen, a center of power and prestige, and she began to transform it. She brought in architects and craftsmen, commissioning renovations that would transform the palace into a magnificent showcase of Plantagenet wealth and authority. It wasn't just about aesthetics, though. Eleanor understood that a grand palace was a symbol of power, a way to impress foreign dignitaries, intimidate rivals, and remind the English people who was really in charge. The birth of Henry and Matilda brought a sudden shift to the royal household. Suddenly, there were tiny, demanding mouths to feed, a flurry of diapers, and a desperate need for more nurses. Eleanor, who had previously been focused on expanding her territories and consolidating her power, found herself thrust into the role of a mother, a role that she surprisingly embraced. She was a fierce, protective mother, determined to ensure the health and well-being of her children. The royal family wasn't just expanding, they were also moving. The crumbling palace at Bermondsey couldn't handle the growing number of dependents. So they relocated to Windsor Castle, a sprawling estate with a magnificent river running through it. Imagine a landscape dotted with lush meadows, serene streams, and dense forests teeming with wildlife: stags, does, boars, and wild bulls. It was a paradise, a place where the royal family could escape the pressures of court and enjoy a taste of rural tranquility. But Henry's ambitions extended far beyond the borders of England. He wasn't content to simply rule a single kingdom; he wanted an empire. And he began to systematically expand his territories throughout France, engaging in a series of wars and alliances that would shape the political landscape of Europe for centuries to come. His first major target was Toulouse, a wealthy and strategically important city in southern France. The Count of Toulouse, Raymond V, was a formidable opponent, and the conquest of Toulouse would require a massive army, one of the largest Henry would ever assemble. He brought together nobles from across his vast domains, Scottish lords, Spanish counts, and even mercenaries from the Holy Roman Empire, all united under his banner. The campaign was brutal and bloody. The army marched through the countryside, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Villages were burned, crops were destroyed, and anyone who resisted was brutally suppressed. Henry himself nearly lost his life during an ambush in Eula Wood, a dense forest near Flint. But he emerged victorious, and in 1158 he finally captured Toulouse, adding it to the Duchy of Aquitaine. But the conquest of Toulouse was just the beginning. Henry's ambitions extended far beyond France. He set his sights on Scotland, seeking to reclaim the northern border counties that had been lost during the Civil War. He forged an alliance with Malcolm IV, the King of Scotland, and together they launched a campaign to drive the Scots out of the region. And then there was the matter of his younger brother, Geoffrey. Geoffrey, a man of ambition and recklessness, believed that he was entitled to the territories that had been inherited by Henry Anjou, Maine, and Touraine. He launched a rebellion, threatening to destabilize Henry's entire empire. The conflict between Henry and Geoffrey was a complex and dangerous game of diplomacy and intrigue. Henry, ever the pragmatist, realized that he couldn't simply crush his brother. He needed to find a way to appease him, to neutralize the threat without sacrificing his own ambitions. So he convened a family conference in Rouen, bringing together Henry, Geoffrey, their youngest brother William, and their aunt Sibylla, Countess of Flanders. Eleanor, acting as a wise and experienced advisor, guided the negotiations. It was a tense and fraught affair, but ultimately Henry managed to secure a deal. He offered Geoffrey a new territory, Nantes, a strategically important city on the Loire River. It wasn't the inheritance Geoffrey had craved, but it was enough to satisfy his ambition and divert his attention away from Henry. Geoffrey, ever the opportunist, accepted the offer and quickly established himself as the Count of Nantes. It was a clever move by Henry, a way to contain his brother's ambitions without resorting to bloodshed. But Henry's empire building wasn't just about military conquest. He also recognized the importance of consolidating his authority and restoring order to his realm. He launched a sweeping program of reform, aimed at dismantling the remnants of Stephen's rule and reasserting the authority of the crown. He ordered the return of castles, towns, and lands that had been granted away under Stephen, effectively erasing the legacy of the Civil War. He abolished the earldoms that Stephen had created, eliminating the threat of powerful regional lords challenging his authority. The process was far from easy. Many of the magnates who had benefited from Stephen's rule resisted Henry's efforts, clinging to their privileges and refusing to acknowledge his authority. But Henry was relentless, using a combination of force and diplomacy to bring them to heel. He confiscated castles packed with hired mercenaries, a common feature of medieval warfare, and systematically demolished them, sending a clear message that he would not tolerate unauthorized military power. The sound of falling timber and the retreat of Flemish soldiers, widely despised by the English people, echoed throughout the land. Henry's actions were not motivated by revenge, but by a desire to restore stability and order to his kingdom. He understood that a strong, unified realm was essential for his long-term success. By the end of the 1150s, Henry II had achieved a remarkable feat. He had transformed a precarious throne into a vast and powerful empire. He controlled England, Normandy, Aquitaine, Anjou, Maine, Touraine, and now Nantes. He was the master of a patchwork of territories stretching from the Scottish Highlands to the Pyrenees, but his empire was not without its challenges. He faced opposition from powerful rivals, both within his own family and abroad. He had to contend with the ambitions of his brothers, the threats of foreign powers, and the constant need to maintain a delicate balance of power. And then there was the matter of the papacy. Pope Adrian IV, a stern and uncompromising figure, challenged Henry's authority, demanding that he acknowledge the rights of the Church and submit to papal jurisdiction. Henry, ever the pragmatist, recognized that he couldn't afford to alienate the Church, so he agreed to pay a hefty sum of money to secure the Pope's blessing. Despite these challenges, Henry continued to expand his empire, embarking on a series of military campaigns and diplomatic maneuvers that would shape the course of European history. He was a shrewd and ruthless ruler, a brilliant strategist, and a skilled diplomat. He was a man who understood the art of power and was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. Was Henry II truly a king? Did he just sit around and sign decrees, or was he a whirlwind of conquest, a force of nature wrapped in velvet robes and a surprisingly sharp sword? He was a complex and contradictory figure, a warrior and a diplomat, a ruthless tyrant and a benevolent ruler, a visionary and a pragmatist. And as he stood on the shores of southern France preparing to lead his army into battle, one thing was clear: Henry II was a force to be reckoned with. His reign would be remembered for centuries to come, a testament to his ambition, his intelligence, and his unwavering determination to build an empire. But the question remains: could a single man truly control such a vast and diverse realm? Could he hold together the disparate territories that made up his empire, or would it eventually crumble under the weight of its own contradictions? Only time would tell. And as the sun set over the French countryside, casting long shadows across the battlefield, one thing was certain: Henry II was about to embark on a new chapter in his extraordinary life, a chapter filled with danger, intrigue, and the promise of even greater glory. But what would become of this empire?